All right, why don't we get started? Our first item this morning is Bill 619, Landlord-Tenant Relations, Termination of Lease, Tenant Health and Safety. And we've got Tim Getzinger, Stephanie Killian, Rose McCray Moody, Maureen Harzinski, and Amanda and Linda. You've been working on this, or Amanda? Take us away.
Sure. As you mentioned, what you have before you is Bill 619, which would require each lease for rental housing in the county to contain a provision to allow the tenant to terminate the lease if the landlord doesn't correct a violation of law that adversely affects the immediate health and safety of the tenant in either the tenant's unit or a common area available for use by the tenant. The landlord would have to repair those. If they're ordered to do so by the department, and if they haven't done so within 30 days, then the tenant can terminate their lease and move to safer housing. If you look on page 2, the violations of law that adversely affect the immediate health and safety of the tenant are spelled out in county law, and they're listed for you in bullet form on page 2. The council received mostly favorable testimony and correspondence on this bill. The only opposition the council received was from AOBA, who opposed Bill 619 because, in their view, current law provides adequate remedies. They noted that current law allows the department to revoke a rental license, which then triggers a requirement for the landlord to notify the tenant has to vacate within a couple of months. Additionally, they thought that the consideration of this bill was premature because of the troubled properties bill that has been implemented. That bill took effect in 2017. Council staff doesn't concur with AOBA's testimony that their conclusion that current law provides adequate remedies, and we think this bill does provide a balance. It's not every provision of law that the tenant can terminate the lease for. It's specific to the life safety issues. The department and the executive support Bill 619, though they do recommend a technical amendment in the section number that we refer to, which our council staff is fine with. So our recommendation is to approve the bill with a technical amendment.
Okay. Director Getzinger, just hear some comments.
Sure, the department doesn't have any concerns with this bill. We feel as though it provides us with another tool in the toolkit, and it also provides with additional safeties for tenants in order to get out of leases that they feel that they need to because of issues that were not corrected by the landlord.
Okay. So there's been one pretty high-profile case that I can think of with mold in the building. I think that may have been the instance that inspired the council member to draft the legislation. Can you just talk to us about what remedies you have without this bill first? What do you do in these cases where you have kind of a pervasive problem throughout the building that isn't getting corrected? And what would be different as a result of the bill?
Sure, there's two other approaches that a tenant could make. I mean, they could obviously file the code issue with our code enforcement office. They could also make a complaint with our landlord-tenant administration section, and they would investigate the issue and look towards mediation. If the issue could not be mediated, then it would go to the commission, COLTA, where they could order lease termination, the return rent, damages up to $2,500, reasonable expenses to find substitute housing, and then they could also approve the tenant to correct and deduct rent. So that's one in which they could go through DHCA, through our mediation process. They could also go to court, and the court can provide certain remedies.
So this sort of moves the enforcement onus off of the tenant to take action on their own and puts more authority in the hands of the department to say, you haven't responded in a timely manner, so now the tenant can go ahead and break the lease.
Exactly.
Okay. Good. Do we have Mr. Friedson?
Yeah, I appreciate it. Just wanted to thank Councilmember Hucker, who's joined us, for introducing this, and I'm happy to support it, happy to be a co-sponsor of it. I appreciate AOBA's concerns that have been raised. I agree with council staff that they are not sufficient. I think that this is carefully tailored. It's very specific instances that are egregious and a specific time frame that would allow a tenant to get out of a lease. I wouldn't say breaking a lease, because my view is in this particular case, with the particular landlords that we're talking about, the expectations of safe living environments have already been broken. It's just allowing the mechanism for a tenant to get out of a situation that nobody should be living under, including infestations and unsafe egress and with windows, which is a fire hazard, and all kinds of other seriously dangerous scenarios. So I think that it's carefully tailored. I think that it's specific, and I think that this is an example of us striking the right balance, and happy to support it and appreciate Councilmember Hucker's leadership.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you also, Councilmember Hucker. This is one of these great bills where we're all co-sponsors, so we agree with it, and I agree with Councilmember Friedson that it makes a lot of sense, and in part because these things are happening, right? These situations, this is not theoretical. I'll be introducing a bill tomorrow dealing with a landlord needing to pay for relocation expenses when the habitant has been condemned, which is something we don't have on the books, and so that's another protection we're going to be adding, and again, that's response to something that's actually happened here in the last 6 to 12 months, and so I'm glad that we're moving forward to provide these protections for our tenants in a very focused way, in response to cases that actually have happened, and also aligned with other kind of pro-tenant legislation across the country where other places are doing this. So I think it's a great bill. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor, and I think, again, this sends the message that we have the expectation that every place that someone lives here in the county should be habitable and should be safe, and if not, you're going to have consequences. People should be able to move on and not do so at great expense to themselves. So I'm really want to commend Councilmember Hucker for being a leader on this issue and thank him for sponsoring the bill.
Thank you. Councilmember Hucker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Morning, everybody. I really appreciate all the kind words about this bill. I wish we didn't have to have a bill like this. I wish we didn't hear from tenants that had to relocate their families from the enclave, and we've heard from other properties over the years at great expense to themselves just to keep their kids in a safe environment. So I appreciate what Councilmember Friedson said about the bill being narrowly tailored, because I don't want anybody to think this is an overly broad overreaction to, to one or two violations. This is really just for tenants that are sort of at the end of their rope facing these health and safety violations for a long time. And hopefully the bill won't ever have to be used, because I think now this puts in place an incentive system so landlords who thought they could get away with neglecting their properties because tenants are really under the constraint that comes with the lease. Now, if the tenants have a little more balance in the power balance in the lease with this language, landlords, I think, will be more proactive about addressing some of these health and safety violations and not letting them go on so long. So hopefully the bill will never really have to be used. Tim, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask just one question about, I know there's those 5 health and safety areas that are in current law. Where is fire doors in that? Because that was something also that came up in the enclave.
It's in chapter 26.
Right. Okay. So I mean, they're sort of left out of this legislation, unfortunately, but and they're not in the tenants unit. But that was something that came up as well. That was, folks complained was happening repeatedly at the enclave, that doors that were meant for egress in common areas had been blocked sometimes by, equipment or debris or something else. So, okay. But anyway, I have nothing on that. Thank you so much to all of you for your support for the legislation.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Hucker. Does DHC have any additional comments?
Rosie McCray Moody. Looking forward to your legislation, because that's been a problem for us, is once a tenancy has been terminated for whatever the reason, is to get the landlords to pay moving expenses or just return the money. The rent for that, the rest of the rent for that month, if something gets condemned, it's just forcing the landlord to return the money and the security deposit. So getting something in writing that says, and you have to pay moving expenses, would be great.
Consider that some advanced public testimony. Okay. All right, good. Well, I think we have a great bill in front of us and another step forward in our effort to improve the quality of our rental housing stock. And without objection, the committee will approve this legislation and recommend it to the council.
With the amendment?
With the amendment. Okay, thanks. We'll move on to the second item, and that is the subdivision staging policy amendment, introduced by Council Members Rice and myself. For those who are here for this, join us. And Glenn, why don't you walk us through the package?
Sure. First of all, apologize for all of the paper that's in front of you, but I'll make sure everyone has a copy. First of all, there's the packet for today. But also you have a memo from Councilmember Hucker that came in late Friday, and a memo from Councilmember Rice that came in over the weekend, and a memo from MHP that came in over the weekend. And I will be referring to each of those as I go through this. As you said, Mr. Reamer, you and Mr. Rice have sponsored this amendment. It would do two things. It would, in an area that's in a housing moratorium under the school test of the subdivision staging policy, the SSP, it would allow a project that generates 10 or fewer students to still be able to go forward if it replaces, I'm just reading it now, replaces or remediates an uninhabited, blighted, or condemned or previously condemned structure within or adjacent to a state-designated opportunity zone. And then alternatively, a separate possibility is if a project generates 10 or fewer students but has more than 50% affordable housing units for families earning 60% or less of AMI. Any SSP amendment requires comments from the planning board and from the county executive within 45 days when they're introduced. The planning board has provided comments for you during the packet. We still have not, however, heard from the executive. It's beyond the 45-day period. They know about this, perhaps, well, I don't see anybody in the audience today about it, but perhaps before the council acts next Tuesday, we'll hear something.
We'd like to hear what the executive's position is on this.
Right. Background for this, these two amendments, if you will, were crafted for two particular projects. One was 850 Sligo Avenue, which is southeast corner of Sligo and Fenton Street in Silver Spring. It's an abandoned office building, or an empty office building that was condemned, and a parking lot, and it's been lying fallow for many years. Originally, the developer, Moonlight Incorporated, applied for subdivision approval of 85 senior units, which would be exempt from the school test. And that was, I believe, approved by the planning board earlier this spring, I think late March. However, since then, the developers asked instead that, or he's requesting instead that the 85 units not be age restricted, that it be just general units. That requires going through the school test, and if it went through that, it would fail because Blair High School cluster is in moratorium now and will be for one more year starting July 1st, along with Einstein, Walter Johnson, and Blake High School clusters, and then a series of individual elementary school service areas. But the key one here is Blair High School. The other project that this was geared for was a project from Montgomery Housing Partnership, which was basically nearby, and they would have provided more than 50% of affordable units. However, the 10-student limit in terms of generation was still too low for the development that they were considering, so they would not be benefiting by this particular proposal.
How many students did they anticipate generating?
From that development, I think it was like 11 or 12. It was close, but in their memo to you, I think they mentioned it. Yes, they said it would generate 11 students. They're looking at several different possibilities. To say even the smallest project, which is planned to have approximately 70 units, would generate 11 students. So it's that short of doing it. They have other near-term projects which are expected to generate anywhere between 11 and 25 units. So that's the background. In terms of the public hearing testimony and correspondence, first of all, let me start with the planning staff. The planning staff concurs with the recommendation from Mr. Rice and Mr. Reamer with a few technical amendments, one of which was to remove the word blighted from the definition because there's no definition for blight in the code, and to add the condition, and leave it as condemned. Condemned would still be condition, but also add the condition of previously condemned structure so that it's current, that it be also currently vacant. So you don't have a situation that a project was previously condemned, but then it was no longer condemned and still, and then basically occupying regular units and then still come under this provision. And finally, they're recommending that the property not merely say it's adjacent to or in or adjacent to an opportunity zone, but to be abutting an opportunity zone as well as a possibility. Abutting means literally touching it. Adjacent, and I'm going to talk to the planning staff, we're thinking in terms of a property that's across the street from the opportunity zone, literally adjacent to the right-of-way, which is itself adjacent to the opportunity zone. I actually, on this point, if I can take a little sidetrack, I talked with Pam Dunn this morning, and she pointed out that in the zoning code there was some fuzziness about the word adjacent, and so the code uses the word confronting. And confronting means a property that's directly across the street from a property. So based on that, what I would recommend here is saying abutting or confronting. Within abutting or confronting. How's that? I'll summarize that at the very end. The planning staff pointed out that this exemption would allow for more housing compared to the current SSP, obviously. The current SSP exempts developments of 3 units or less. And it really was put in there many, many years ago to deal with issues where you have maybe one property which can take a vacant property which could have one house, or perhaps if we subdivided up to 3 lots for 3 houses, single-family houses. Doesn't say that in the definition, but I can't think of any three-unit multifamily developments. A 3-unit subdivision of single-family houses generates 0.6 students at the elementary level, so it's basically even less than 1 student. And this, of course, would increase it to 10 students, so it's a 17-fold increase in the size of the exemption. if it meets these other conditions. And then a multifamily development generating 10 students, depending on its location in the county and whether the development's low-rise or high-rise, would translate to anywhere between 43 and 549 units.
Why
And that
is
table
that range so wide?
Well, if you look on Circle 9 of the packet, they point this out. It's based on which part of the region you're in, because there are different generation rates the school system uses for the East region, the Southwest region, and the Upcounty region, and there's differences between multifamily low-rise and high-rise. And so the smallest is in the East region, a low-rise multifamily situation would generate 10 students represents 43 units. In the case of a Upcounty region multifamily, 549 units represents 10 students. So that's the difference. It's quite a bit of difference between low-rise and high-rise, and somewhat of a difference between East, Southwest, and Upcounty.
Okay, wait, so I just want to see this. So all of these, on Circle 9, all of these generate 10 students.
That's my understanding.
So you've got in multifamily low-rise a range from 43 to 60 units, depending on the region of the county. And then in multifamily high-rise, you've got a range from 124 to up to 549 units. So that's really interesting. I don't quite understand what accounts for such a... Is that based on occupancy of existing structures, or is that based on enrollment from new development?
Sure. For the record, Jason Sartori with the Planning Department. These are based on updated student generation rate data that we calculated using 2018 student enrollment data, so the school year that just ended last week. What we found was that there are very few high-rise structures in the Upcounty region. It's, I think, about 4,500 units, and they're generating very, very, very few students. And so that's why you can get, based on those, and these are, again, the way we calculate these, we take every single student and we map them to an address, and then we take that address and we know what type of structure is there. So we know what whether they're living in a single-family home or a high-rise. And so what we're seeing is that there are just very few students living in high-rises in the Upcounty area.
Okay. I guess I hadn't realized, by the way, that there were very few high-rise multifamily buildings in the Upcounty area. It never occurred to me one way or the other, but
Well, I don't want
the
to.
zoning doesn't allow it, or is that just the history of?
I mean, I think as the county developed, I think the first, what was considered a high-rise structure in the county was the Pooks Hill, right next to the Pooks Hill Marriott. There's like an 8-story building. I think that was at the time it was built in, I think, the early 60s, considered a high-rise. That was like a precedent-setting project at the time. Over time, you have very few, just because of the market. You're going to have high-rise going to emerge in some of the central business districts like Silver Spring, Bethesda, even Wheaton, where the market might not necessarily be strong, but you have more urban context. And then, of course, there were a few that were an artifact of some of the land use plans of the 80s and earlier, like the on Route 29 at Briggs Cheney and White Oak. You have some high-rise structures, but generally speaking, the high-rise is more expensive construction type. You're going to see that in a place where the real estate market is stronger, and at a later point in time when the county was already built out in some of those central business districts. I didn't want to open a can of worms here, but I think that since this subject comes up, it's important to point out that nobody has yet, the planning staff has not yet tried to isolate the reasons why there seem to be more school children per unit living in multifamily in the East County. My theory, and it is yet to be subjected to rigorous analysis, is that it has more to do with age of structure than building type. And if I'm right about that, this sort of illustrates why.
Which isn't a proxy for affordability?
Partially, yeah. And also partially because the older structures tend to be have larger number of bedrooms because of the era in which they're built. Developers were building multifamily with more bedrooms, generally. I'm overgeneralizing. My point is that number one, that's important to know, because if that's true, that would suggest that a new multifamily building in East County might generate fewer students than what the generation rates suggest, even though the generation rates are derived from real-world data. But there could be a material difference, and if you're talking about a project that under the generation rate, you assume it's going to be 10 versus it's 11, that could make a big difference in whether or not it qualifies for an exemption for affordable housing or blighted property. But the more general point I just want to make is that I think in this county, we tend to, all of us, our citizens, our staff, our elected officials, our appointed officials, want to come up with more precise measurements of everything, in the thought and the sort of faith that if we can only refine our methodologies sufficiently, we can know, will this building have 10 students or will it have 11 students? And the truth is, that kind of precision is somewhat misleading. We can't really know the future with that kind of precision, and yet we wind up creating rules that put us in these boxes. So I don't mean to wax philosophic on you early on a Monday morning, but I think it bears pointing all this out so you can keep it in mind as you're thinking about the upcoming revisions to the SSP, where I hope we kind of have a appropriate degree of modesty about our own ability to forecast the future.
Yep. Councilmember Joando is going to go work on community policing at the Public Safety Committee.
I'm in favor
Okay.
Yeah, so that-
Good to know. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So, continuing to the packet.
Okay, I mentioned the planning staff's recommendations to the board. Now, the board's recommendation, they agreed with the planning staff's technical revisions. They had one more point, however. Commissioner Dreyfus recommended having basically any residential development that generates 10 or fewer students be exempt from the school test. And frankly, that would moot the other 2 points, it would fall under that category. You wouldn't need to meet the other conditions. The public hearing you held last week, you heard from the developer, Stacy Silver, representing her, of course, supporting the Rice-Reamer amendment. Jane Lyons from the Coalition of Smarter Growth, who's here today, supports it as well, with several ideas for how the SSP might be altered in the future, because there is a new SSP that's due in about 17 months, and the planning board will be working on that over the course of fiscal year 20 to basically provide more affordable housing. You also heard from the Addis Ababa restaurant, which is nearby, supporting it, and we also received correspondence, it's not in the packet here, from Clear Communications, Fenton Cafe, and from a nearby resident, Kathy Stevens, also supporting the amendment. MCCPTA commented, and they support the amendment as well, but with 2 caveats. The first is to apply only one development per impacted school, so you don't have several different possible 10-unit or 10-student developments going into the same area and perhaps generating a much larger issue in terms of overcrowding in the school. And the second language be added that the 10-student limit be applied to all the units in a structure, not just the additional units proposed. Typically what happens is when the planning board reviews a development, it may be vacant, the property, but they still have units in them, and they treat them as being units that are counted towards potential generation. And so if there's additional number of units being provided through the development, that's the initial units that they count. MCCPTA is recommending counting all of them. Stacy Kobrick from Bethesda also concurs with the MCCPTA's second caveat, and she recommends that development also be reviewed at site plan, just to make sure that the requirements under the amendment are still met by the time you go to site plan.
Okay. We talk about this particular issue.
Sure.
Okay, which units we count? Is it the whole building, or is it only the delta between units that were there before, units that are now proposed? It seems totally academic. As Glenn pointed out, this is a commercial building that's being converted.
In this case, it is academic.
In this case, it is. And will we be specifically addressing this kind of issue in the new rewrite? Because if we are, then, this applies to a couple of things. We don't need to worry too much about what's here, because there is no building that's going to come online and get through the process in the time before we have a new subdivision staging policy. Or, Jason, what can you, are we going to address these kinds of issues or not?
So I hope that we do, yes. I hope that we add some clarity to all of the processes and the procedures by which we do all of these calculations so that it's clear to everyone how this is done. Just to clarify, the way we do this now, when we evaluate the impact of a development application, if it's a project that's removing, let's say, 3 single-family homes and replacing that with a high-rise with 100 units, then we do give a credit for those 3 single-family homes as long as they were used for residential purposes. Assuming that those were generating students already, you get the credit for that. In a case, what we specified in our staff report was that in the case of a demolition of a condemned or previously condemned residential structure that is vacant, the enrollment impact estimate would be based solely on the proposed new residential units. So in the case of 850 Sligo, yes, it's a commercial structure, so there are no residential units. It would just be the 85 new units that are proposed. But in the case of another that maybe is removing some low rise that is vacant, if they're vacant, they're not, and they've been vacant, then they're not generating students. We wouldn't see why we should count that a credit for removing those. So we would only count the new units that we assume will be generating students. So if the application process is started and there are people living in those structures, then we'll give a credit for that. But if there aren't, we count the new. If it's currently vacant when they start that application process, then we'll only count the new structures.
And, but more fundamentally, will this exemption remain in the SSP?
Oh.
Are we only talking about what will be in effect until the SSP is rewritten, or should we be thinking we're crafting a policy that might very well remain in the SSP, and so this should be a policy that is built to last?
So we have made a point with planning staff that this SSP, our focus is primarily going to be on the schools piece. We feel like we made a lot of innovative changes last time on transportation, so this time we're going to really focus on the schools piece. So we're going to look at every single piece of this, including the existing, we have the de minimis, we have the senior housing, and then potentially this additional exception to the moratorium. We would look at all of these again. So if this is part of the policy, we would evaluate and get feedback from the community, go through a whole process over the course of the next year to see if it's something that is worth keeping in. And we would make our recommendations to the planning board, who would then make the recommendations to you. So we would evaluate this again.
So you will be evaluating what kinds of escape hatches there might need to be in a subdivision staging policy in general.
Yeah.
That's part of the scope. You haven't, I haven't
We look at the whole policy, and it includes these exceptions to the moratorium.
Andrew.
Thank you. A couple things. One is, I think it would be helpful for me at least if we can separate out the SSP and what we're going to do and some of the philosophical things with the bill that we have and kind of voting on the different provisions. But I think the aspect of the SSP and whether or not the policies that we put in place are, kind of built to last, and whether they're supposed to survive the SSP or whether they're just supposed to be a bridge to get us to the SSP, which is a really important and fundamental question that you've raised. My view is, to a certain extent, it's a distinction without a difference, because what we do this recently to an SSP is an indication of the council's view, and so it is precedent setting. And so, that's why I think as we look at this, we ought to be focusing and tailoring the focus of this bill on what it is intended to do and not get caught in trying to expand it and try to, basically start the SSP process now. That being said, I share everybody's concerns, trust me, on where we find ourselves and, the moratorium, which is a a much broader issue and how we are putting a stranglehold on our economy. We're denying ourselves the ability to raise tax revenue. We are diminishing housing that we desperately need in areas where they clearly should have additional housing for reasons that extend beyond the policy. But I share everybody's concerns. I'm not sure we can solve that problem here, and I think we ought to be thinking about as we craft this bill that the bridge, if that is how we're viewing it, to a new SSP is also an indication of how we view these policy issues. And I think to have a significant change a year after we've made a significant change that is philosophically different to the way we view an issue would be a challenge, and I think is frankly unlikely. And so I see it as we aren't just
Well, I wouldn't agree
putting
with
in
you
place.
there. I think we're
Yeah.
going to wipe the slate clean here, and we're writing a new SSP, and so what we're trying. I view what we're trying to do now is getting through the next 18 months.
But we aren't writing a new SSP. I mean, what we've heard from planning is that we focused on transportation. We think we've done pretty well on transportation. We're going to build off of that and focus on schools, which we think we've underwhelmed on. To me,
And that's what this is.
that's not wiping the slate clean. That's building off of what we have and admitting to the shortcomings that we've created and trying to resolve.
This is the school's.
No, I understand. I don't think we're not talking. I mean, the SSP is not a total scrap, rewrite, redo. This is, we're.
Well, we don't know.
I would say I think we always appreciate having some sense of where you guys are thinking in terms of this. And so the fact that we're doing this now is something that we'll have in our minds. But at the same time, we are going to look at every piece of that school's component. And even the moratorium, just questioning whether or not the moratorium is the right policy decision
Right.
at all.
Exactly.
And so we're going to look at all of this, try to ask what's working, what's not working, what needs to stay, what needs to be thrown away, and we'll be talking to people from all walks of life, stakeholders who are impacted by this and on all sides. So
I think we're starting
we
from
may-
a clean slate on SSP schools. If you're saying we don't need to redo the transportation piece much, that's fine with me because it was very complicated doing it last time. But I just think we ought to be starting from a clean slate and thinking about what the best policy is. So that's just why I'm worried about this one, because we are seemingly indicating council's intent about very, very, angels dancing on the head of the pin, and we want to be talking about, like, why are we doing this in the, what's our big picture goal here?
Anyway, I'd like to cover my recommendations, then come to the comments from Mr. Hucker, Mr. Rice, and MHP, because in some degree they're reacting to what I'm recommending. I follow the same point of view as particularly Mr. Friedson, I think maybe to you too, Mr. Reamer, which is really this amendment was to deal with a couple of properties, and we shouldn't be letting the tail wag the dog. So, because there's just not been nearly enough analysis to figure out what is the balance point between affordable housing and overcrowding in schools. And there are myriad of opportunities or myriad of options to figure out where it is. And at the end of the day, you want to know what the effect is on the entire county, not just
Right.
a little local areas.
I think exactly. Like, this conversation leads us probably to the same place, actually, on a lot of these specifics.
I don't think there's any disagreement there.
Yeah.
I want to clarify.
Fine. So my first recommendation is to agree with basically what the planning staff's proposal was, with their technical corrections, with the exception of using words abutting and confronting rather than abutting and adjacent. And then if you look at Mr. Hucker's proposal, I do want to refer to this briefly, he had some substantive recommendations, but also some technical ones. And he had two technical amendments, which I think were right on, which is just really wording. One is, say, 10 or fewer students, rather 10 or less. That's correct. That's more correct.
That's an important distinction. I like to always keep in mind it's fewer, not less.
In this case, it's fewer.
I'm a big believer in 10 or fewer, because fewer has historically been the grammatically correct way to do it, but I actually believe they have formally changed that because of the common vernacular where people use it wrong. I don't support that, but I want you to know that it has, I believe you can look it up, it has officially been changed, and as somebody who takes grammar very seriously, I just think it's important for us to be
another sign of the apocalypse.
to be factually accurate. I think it was a bad move, and I'd be fully supportive of it.
Use fewer. Yeah, fewer is supposed to be, less is supposed to be for a volume of things. If you have
Exactly.
2 liters instead of 3 liters, that's less. But if you have, individual things like people or households, it's fewer. Anyway, and the other correction he has in the last page, he's referring to in the second part, which I'm actually going to recommend deleting anyway. But it says, is a project having more than 50% affordable housing for households. So if you go with that, include the word households instead. So anyway, I'm recommending approval of that.
Hey, wait, are you going to go through?
I'm going to go through each of my bullets. I'm still basically on the first bullet on page 3. I'm sorry, before the bullets on page 3. So I'm basically, again, recommending the planning staff's recommendations with these technical amendments. I would recommend that there be a sunset provision on part 1, on the one having to do with condemned buildings. Because it is, again, geared towards one property. It's in the Blair cluster. Blair will be out of moratorium as of July 1st. And so I don't see any reason why it has to go beyond that. Now, Mr. Rice, in his comments, does not recommend that. He says there does not seem to be a pressing need to do what I'm suggesting. I'm just reading his memo. While it's highly likely that the Blair cluster will be out of moratorium by then, any change in the schedule could place an undue burden on any development that proceeded due to this resolution.
Okay.
And I'll offer an alternative, which if you don't like July 1st, then I would say November 15th, which is the deadline of the next SSP. And you're going to have a new SSP from that point anyway, so one or the other.
Is that the deadline for the council to pass
Yes.
the SSP?
It's the deadline for November 15th, 2020.
Look, so Councilmember Rice doesn't want to see a sunset on this. I think it is all academic because we're going to be wiping the slate here on this whole part of the SSP and rewriting. And so, I would just assume agree with him and not get into the need for him to make a motion at the full council, which he might decide he wants to do. So
The worry I have is that, and on this and really the general proposal, is that, again, this is an idea which is to address one property. And I don't want anyone to think, and I know you have long memories, but in a year from now, that somehow this is the precedent, that it's a given, and then now any interest group that wants to say, well, now you have to do better than that. I think you basically ought to sunset this and start and allow the planning staff and the planning board to come back fresh without being...
Okay, so you're saying the sunset sort of really indicates that this whole thing is a bridge
Yes.
to a new policy.
Right, which could be looser, could be tighter, I don't know. That's perfect kind of decisions that councils make. How do you balance affordable housing with overcrowding in schools? I don't know what the answer is.
What is sunsetting? Everything or just one specific piece of it?
Part 1, which is the one having to do with allowing up to 10 students being generated if it's a condemned property or previously condemned property that's still vacant, that is abutting or confronting an opportunity zone. That provision would sunset on, I'd said July 1st. I think it's okay to say November 15th if you want to say that, but basically just have it end either after the moratorium's gone, in which case it's moot anyway, or if you're worried that maybe Blair will get delayed again, put it to November 15th, and then by then you will have decided what the rule is generally, not just in Blair, but everywhere else.
Yeah, I totally appreciate where you're coming from, but I think I yield with to Councilmember Rice's view on this. I mean, I understand the purpose, but to me, it's not just. I'm perfectly comfortable with the precedent saying that there is a significant public interest in being able to redevelop a blighted property, and I don't see a major concern. I mean, we could be finding ways to expand and change the moratorium on specific properties all over, and there is a compelling public interest in building housing or doing other things. But this is a very specific, very, very tailored provision specific to the fact that if you have a blighted, condemned, et cetera, property in a neighborhood, that is not serving anybody's purpose. And it is diminishing the entire neighborhood. And so to have a policy where you can't fix a clear problem that everybody recognizes doesn't make any sense. I don't see the need to sunset that. I think that we will have an opportunity to address it. We still are the policymakers. We can giveth and taketh away if it is necessary, but I don't see a compelling need to sunset it, although I do understand what you're saying. It frankly relates directly to the previous conversation that we were having.
I think I philosophically agree with Glenn that this whole thing is sunsetting in a sense, but I'm going to agree with you, Andrew, and just say let's not put it in the language. And
Sure.
but I will express at full council that this is a patch. This is a bridge to a new policy, and we're going to be
Okay.
reworking the whole thing.
So no sunset. The next point is from MCCPTA. I am recommending that this be limited to one development per impacted school. So you don't have a series of potentially 10 student developments in the same area. And Mr. Hucker in one of his substantive proposals also supports that.
Okay, so again, this is why I keep asking these questions. Like, what is the timeline? If there was another building, how much longer does that building have to make itself known before it's sort of moot? Because there's no way they could get going through the process in time. Or is this something that is important right at the very beginning, right from the get-go?
Well, I mean, in principle, you're supposed to be able to get a preliminary plan approved in 120 days. In practice, I think you need a little bit more lead time than that because you need to get all your architects and engineers and
Let me ask you this way. I think it matters right now. Let's say there's another blighted building. I can't think of one in Silver Spring, but let's just say there's another one let's say there's one in Wheaton, and that's affected. We want someone to begin working on what it might take to invest in that building, and having the moratorium in place is a problem because they can't get their investment. They'll have trouble getting their investment lined up. As a practical matter, it might take them 2 years to go through all of these processes, and at that point, the SSP is rewritten, and who knows how it would be affected. But if we said there's only one, then there couldn't. Well, I guess my Wheaton example is a bad example actually, because that might not be Blair. This is per school, so there would have to be a second blighted building in the Blair cluster. I can't think of one.
You're talking Tacoma Park.
Do you know where all the blighted buildings are? Oh,
For our analysis for the planning board, we looked at the list of informally condemned properties, and the only property we found that was 850 Sligo. We found two others.
you looked at county-wide or in the Blair cluster?
Countywide, we found one property that is in the Blair cluster that is projected to go into moratorium. We found two others that fit the definition of condemned or formerly condemned, but they are not in areas slated to go into moratorium.
They are different school clusters.
Different school clusters.
And just for clarification, those are ones that meet the criteria as introduced with in or abutting or adjacent to, whatever terminology we want to use, of an opportunity zone, not of what was recommended by Councilmember Hucker, which I think he gave some sort of distance, a half mile, a quarter mile, or something like that. So we didn't look beyond what was adjacent to.
Yeah, I didn't quite get, if Councilmember Hucker was here, he might be able to explain why he wanted to make the reach essentially further by going a mile from.
Talked with his staff who said that he wasn't sure what adjacent meant, so he thought he'd put a definition on it. And he mentions in his packets either a half mile or a mile. I wouldn't recommend that because, frankly, if you're a half mile or a mile away from an opportunity zone, you're pretty far away from it, and it doesn't really meet the same criteria.
Or certainly for a mile, yeah. But in any event, The point being, you looked at the list of buildings in the county, and there are 3 buildings in all of Montgomery County that might qualify, and the other 2 aren't in a moratorium. So we're talking about nothing, and we're layering in additional requirements for nothing, and we're, just, it's a pointless exercise. And so why do it? That's how I feel. Andrew?
Yeah, I agree. I think we've solved the problem. I mean, I appreciate where Councilmember Hucker was coming from. There wasn't a significant amount of clarity of what we were specifically talking about. I think everybody had an idea of what we wanted to do, but we didn't specifically write it in a way that reflected that. I think by the suggested language that you've included, the abutting and confronting, abutting or confront, or abutting or confronting, yeah, or whatever, however that language is written out. I think, we all want across the street, we all want touching. I mean, everybody agrees that that is extremely close and should be included. And so I think we've, kind of solved the issue that he's addressed, which I think we all agreed on needed some clarity. And I think we've.
And frankly, if there was a fire, at a building in Silver Spring, I wouldn't want that to sit 2 years waiting, I wouldn't want to screw that up. I'd want them to be able to go ahead and rebuild it.
And you're literally looking at, I think part of this is when we're talking about a condemned property, who are the impacted parties? It's not just the people who live in that building, it's the people who are across the street, are next to. You walk out of your building if you have to.
Well, I count myself in that category. I live pretty darn close to the Sligo building, and it's been an issue. It was one of the locations that motivated me on the sidewalk snow, because the building owners were not clearing the sidewalk of snow, and it's a very big intersection, and it was like crazy. It was really dangerous right out in front of that building. It's been a problem in the community for a long time. Lisa, did you release the names of those, or the identity of those buildings? Are they public anywhere?
We did not release them in our staff report, but that is something that we can make public by full council. The other thing is
Could we just make sure they're in the packet? I think that would be comforting to people to know that here's the 3 buildings, and if they had a question about another building, they could obviously bounce that off you, and you could say, oh, actually it's not, or whatever.
The other thing is they also are, the other 2 condemned are part of attached structures, so it makes redevelopment very unlikely, considering that they're connected to properties that are not condemned.
So it's a piece of a building essentially that's condemned?
Strip malls.
That's strip malls. So there's no other, interesting. Okay.
All right, so I guess on the question I have for you is for that second bullet on page 3, is that something a condition you want to add or not? In a sense, it's moot if we're just talking about 850 Sligo, but it's a good principle, I think, generally speaking, to have something.
I'm fine with it.
Well, I actually don't think it's a good principle, because what about the fire situation? What if there's a fire and the building is condemned, and you're in the moratorium? I guess that means you can only build exactly what you had. You couldn't do something bigger.
No,
It means you couldn't have another development other than 850 Sligo.
No, I think the more apt comparison, just respectfully, is if there was a fire. I'm just trying to understand this. If there was a fire, that fire impacted 2 properties that were connected to, or next to each other. It was a huge fire of, 4-bell fire, 4-alarm fire, and you had to pick between, planning department, or it was like the fastest person to come to planning to say, hey, we have a condemned property, even though it's in moratorium, we want to get something up. Would that impact it? Those would obviously be in the same school cluster because they're literally next to each other, based on some of our, maybe not obviously, but most likely in the same school cluster. And that would be the impact. That is an exceptional case. I think maybe we make a provision for that, but I think the bigger challenge is we're trying to demonstrate the fact that this is a very narrowly focused, very narrowly tailored solution, and I'm a little bit concerned with the issues that have been raised. The only real opposition here are people who think that we are undermining our own policy in order to get around it, and I don't think that's what our real intention here is. We see a clear shortcoming. We recognize that there are lots of other broader shortcomings that hopefully we're going to solve in the next SSP, because clearly this is a problem that needs to be fixed. But I'm a little concerned about broadening this out further than how we're intending, and raising concerns that are not necessary and don't really get us anything.
Okay, but this bullet
Tangible.
is a additional restriction based on what was proposed. This is proposing to restrict it further. And it's because of imaginary demons, I think. And I don't think we should play into that a little bit, you know? Like, come on, this is simple, this is straightforward, and we're gonna be rewriting the SSP. So I just don't see the need to continue adding more and more and more restrictions here. I understand the concern, but I think we know based on the data that this is a very, very minimal, the risk here is so minimal that why undertake all these additional layers and layers and layers of restrictions? I think then we're sort of going in the wrong direction generally on the moratorium philosophically. I have some real concerns about this. And so that's kind of where I'm at. But it's too bad Mr. Joando isn't here. He could be the tiebreaker, I think. But, you know.
Wando actually, when I didn't hear what he said, did he make any?
He just said he supported it. I think he didn't speak to any of the specific.
I think I'm gonna, for the minutes, not record anything about what he didn't really say it publicly.
You could ask him, you could poll him after the meeting, and is that what you mean, basically?
Maybe that's what I'll do. Okay. Right, okay. So this one, it's a split.
So it's a split. Again, this was not in the proposal. The proposal is to add an additional restriction that it was only one school that can be affected.
Okay.
I think it's not a problem, but I think it is not needed.
Okay. Before I go to the third bullet, I want to refer to a couple of other comments that Mr. Hooker had made, because they really pertain to part one. One is that he is recommending that, well, we talked about the half mile versus a mile, and it sounded like you weren't for that. He's also recommending changing previously condemned to a structure condemned within a certain time period, such as in the last 5 years. Again, what the planning board is saying, staff and board is saying is condemned or previously condemned and currently vacant. And I don't know whether or not you, and I support that as well, but Mr. Hooker's recommending something slightly different. Recommend changing previously condemned to a structure condemned within a certain time period, such as.
The currently vacant is the real hook, right?
Exactly.
That's the thing that's.
You've solved that. I mean, I think planning has solved this with currently vacant, and that eliminates the issue. So I'm totally for the planning recommendation.
Okay, fine. And his last comment was one you already talked about, which is the one about affecting one school. He's in favor. He agrees with Mr. Friedson, I guess. But we already talked about that issue.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, the third bullet on page 3, I'm recommending not approving part 2, which is the one that was crafted for the MHP project, because again, there's no takers for it as written. However, you do have the memo from MHP, which suggests several different ways that the SSP could be amended to be able to accommodate more housing of their type.
Right, I just want to be clear. The Part 2 provision, it was the one that the board recommended that said to change the de minimis, right?
No.
This is 50% affordable.
Part 2 was saying if you have 10 or fewer students,
It's the
you
MHP
can go forward
provision,
if
but
you have
MHP
more than 50% affordable housing.
The idea was to help an affordable housing nonprofit developer to
Yes.
be able to develop properties. We now learn that those are not eligible based on this, and so the question is whether it should still be included if it's in there to solve a problem that we can't solve in this
Right.
mechanism.
Alternatively, you could, although I would not recommend it, is go with any of the MHP options in their packet now. I would rather that be studied more comprehensively by the planning staff and board to come up with the right
At least
set of
just talk
solutions.
about what the MHP recommendations are.
Sure. This on, again, their memo from dated June 14th that came in over the weekend. It's really on page 2.
I'd like to give Chris Gillis a Thursday deadline. Is he here? Where is he?
He's not
It's a
here.
good memo, but
I'll just,
I want to speak for you here and say that Father's Day is a tough day to get
Yeah.
a memo before a Monday morning Fed session, but it has a lot of terrific information in it.
there are three options. One is to, let's see, to look at new students generated as a percentage of overall capacity of the school, as opposed to a fixed number of students, rather than just saying adding 10 students, regardless of the size of the school. He's pointing out 10 students to a school with a capacity of 400 students, like an elementary school. If you have an elementary school service area, which is a moratorium, adding 10 students could be, it feels like a lot more than adding 10 students to a school like Blair, which is close to 3,000 students. It's an idea. In terms of impact on the need for additional classrooms, it doesn't relate to the size of the school. I mean, if you have 20 more students total, you need another classroom, whether it's elementary school or high school. But in terms of percentage, yes, obviously it's a lot less. Another option, a second option, would be allow more affordable housing units to receive subdivision approval as long as the units don't come online until after the 4th year of the 6-year moratorium period. It's actually a 5-year moratorium period. But his point is that if they were to guarantee, if the planning board were to approve a project and say one of the conditions is you can't have these units open and available for rental or for ownership with it until 4 years have passed, then yes, you're allowing for overcrowding, but only in that last year. Third option is to set aside school capacity for affordable housing units so that no project is meeting demonstrated need for low-income units is prevented from moving forward. So what they're really saying here is that in the net remaining capacity that the planning board shows for each of these clusters in individual schools areas, there would be a certain amount that would be held in reserve. So effectively, the projected capacity would even be lower than what it is now, allowing some space for affordable units automatically to go in. Again, these are sort of big ideas, and they're probably 3 of 300, which might be generated over the course of the next year, and I think they all be totally evaluated and have the planning staff and board make recommendations as to which to go forward with, and then you can deliberate over that fall of next year. So I'm not recommending changing that now.
So, did you have any comments? Yeah.
And without someone from MHP here, I would just want some clarity on which projects they think could not go forward and the number of students that they've calculated that they would generate. Because, again, based on what we were talking about before, they talk about specifically their Forest Glen project. And if it's the one that I'm thinking of, it has, there are units that exist today that people are living in. They're generating students, and if those units are removed, we give them a credit for that. And so I don't know how much they'd be replacing it with, but it's possible that it might actually fit within the 10 student when they adjust for the credit that they get for the units that are currently occupied.
I thought it was a big empty lot on Sligo Avenue. Isn't that the project?
They refer to one in Forest Glen, and so the one that I'm thinking of is currently occupied. So it's possible that they may still benefit from this if we can get some clarity from them.
They didn't understand the credit.
Yeah.
So, given that, I mean, the question is whether or not you want to keep this in at least until next week. Well, it'd be
Keep in the, oh, right, because if we take it out and then they can't,
right.
We could follow up with them in
yeah. We do.
And one thing's, all right, so we'll just basically hold off on this and say the committee hasn't made a recommendation on this yet, or?
Are we recommending to keep it in, or are we recommending that we wait until we hear
I think
back?
what I'm hearing Mr. Reamer say at least is make no recommendation on that one now. Wait till we get more information and talk about it at the council next Tuesday, I think.
I'm thinking.
But, I mean, if we're going to do, I'm sensitive to the fact that maybe there was a misunderstanding. It'd be great if they were here, and I have a tremendous amount of appreciation for what MHP does for affordable housing, the thoughtfulness. I mean, I think I agree with Dr. Orland in that there are some big ideas here, and I think this is probably not the best venue to address some of those big ideas. I hope that they are part of a robust discussion and significantly involved in the SSP, particularly on schools, which I believe they will be, and I look forward to them being part of that because they obviously have a lot to add. I am a little concerned with not having a recommendation before the full council.
Keep it in, because that wasn't something that people objected to, right? The public testimony was fine on this provision as well.
Could I propose that my recommendation, if you're willing to support it, would be to support keeping it in if we get confirmation that they actually can utilize it, if not taking it out as our recommendation to the full council. I mean, I don't know why we would keep it in if it's not serving any purpose. I mean, it just seems, I'm not saying that there's necessarily objections, but I think the whole purpose, the whole statement we're trying to make is that
I was
it's.
fine taking it out before when I thought it had no effect either, just as I'm fine not putting things in that I think have no effect. In order to do what you described, then, I mean, it's just sort of a contingent recommendation. What is it exactly, Glenn? It's, yes, or it's a maybe.
Well, if we receive confirmation by X time,
All right.
whatever is appropriate, then we would keep it in. If not, the formal recommendation would be to take it out. I mean, I think it's pretty clear.
So I think you've clarified publicly what the choices are that we'll be considering, and we'll follow up.
So the committee recommends leaving it in if we learn by the time I write this packet that that MHP in fact can use this on any of their properties, not just the one that's near 850 Sligo. There may be another one, Forest Glen, that might be. But if not, that it would come out.
Yeah, that would be my recommendation. I don't, if you're willing to go along with it.
Okay. And then the last item.
Again, I just want to reemphasize, like, I don't love the principle of saying affordable housing doesn't get a priority treatment, but again, why put something in there that has no impact? Why add things that have no impact? Let's just cut to the chase here.
Right. And then the final point is, again, Mr. Dreyfus's proposal, the planning board supports, of changing the de minimis rule to 10 students generally, and then not having these other two provisions because they would moot those other two.
So that is definitely an item for the rewrite. That's not
Agreed.
Okay. I think that's it. I think we've covered all the items.
We agreed to the technical changes.
yeah.
Formally.
So do you disagree, not including it, correct?
Not including Mr. Dreyfus's recommendation, it sounded like there's agreement from both of us, but I just want to, the technical changes that were discussed in the beginning, I don't know that we ever
Yeah,
said, I support them, I just don't know that we ever formally said that we
Yeah,
do.
let me summarize then where I think we're at. Support the Rice-Reamer amendment with the following, I guess, conditions. First of all, that I'll call it continue to call it part one. With the technical changes, the planning board's recommending, except changing the words abutted to and adjacent to abutting and confronting, and to also the couple of technical changes that Mr. Hucker had mentioned, which are just grammatical, really.
Can I ask a quick question about the condemned thing? What about all the purple line? Isn't all that property condemned when they take it?
On circle, I would have made a chart. On circle 13, you have a list of all the properties that I found were either classified condemned or formally condemned through DHC's database. I will further confirm with them if the purple line properties are in there, or maybe they're missing some and hasn't been updated, but that is what they sent me, is the most current list.
Seems unlikely that in the few cases where a property is going to get property back, like the Spring Center, it's not going to happen for 4 or 5 years.
They won't get it back for 4 or 5 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's used as a staging area, and but most of the properties that are condemned are just going to be occupied by a library line, so nobody will be building any housing there. No school children will be inhabiting the.
We sure hope not.
We hope.
Yeah, it seems kind of a dangerous place
Sleep on
for
the
school
purple line,
children.
go
to
back
be.
and forth. Yeah.
Although I will point out that I think the 0.6 school children piece, I was thinking back to my school days where I had several teachers explain that they didn't think that I was fully there. I think they might have been referring to me as the 0.6 student.
Excellent. I'm going to hang on to that. That's good.
So that's part of the committee's recommendation. Again, the proposal did not support a sunset, and there would be no sunset. And part two would be left in if we learn that there is a property or more than one property that MHP would actually qualify for under the 50% or more units being affordable, and that you would not include the planning board's proposals proposed by Commissioner Dreyfus to make the, generally speaking, 10-student
Okay.
de minimis.
All right, well, I can't let the issue go without just a more general observation. I think that we are really working against ourselves with this whole moratorium. The fact that Grosvenor, a development right on top of the metro, can't proceed because there's a 1-year gap in when the high school capacity comes online is just, it's undermining our other major goals in it for really a minimal purpose. The fact that the Westfield Montgomery Mall can't proceed with its investment. I just think it's frustrating because we have added the school capacity to the budget. We've solved the moratorium. We've just solved it 6 years from now instead of 5 years from now. And that 1 year is having a big impact on some projects that meet a lot of big community, county goals. And this amendment isn't really about that. And I thought long and hard about proposing something that would address those, but just didn't feel like there would likely be interest, and it was just not feasible. But I continue to be open to ideas there. And at least we can do this one with minimal ripples, but I think it's profoundly problematic. I think that the county heard the message and got the funding into the budget. Whether the moratorium played any real role in that, I don't know. But the school capacity played a real role in that. We know that. We added the funding to the budget for the school capacity because we needed the school capacity. And I'm not sure that the moratorium was really much of a motivator there. But in any event, I think it is a very bad situation that we find ourselves in. How can a property owner go out and get hundreds of millions of dollars of investment if they can't explicitly say, we can proceed? And so even though these things always take longer, I think of Grosvenor. Grosvenor's the kind of development that, who knows, it's so large it could end up taking longer anyway, and it all would work out just fine. But they can't really get started because they can't demonstrate that they can proceed. So,
Well, that's one of the issues, I guess, again, that planning staff and board will be looking at over the next year is what is the number of years? One of the problems, though, and Ms. Lyons in her testimony suggested perhaps going out 6 years rather than 5. We'd have to work closely with the school system because the school system's forecasts themselves only go out 5 years. There isn't a 6-year forecast. There's like a 15-year forecast or something, but not. It doesn't show up as 6 years, so we need to actually have the numbers if we were to do that. But the reason why 5 was selected years ago was because at the time that SSP was done, it was probably back when it was the growth policy, that was determined to be the average time it took for housing development to go from subdivision approval to construction, completion, and occupancy. Some occupied less than that. They did within 3 or 4 years. Some took longer than that, but the average was 5 years.
yeah, there's logic for it. Not saying that there isn't. I think that, but the illogic of the big picture, comes into relief when we've added hundreds of millions of dollars to the budget. We've got high schools that are opening, and yet we can't proceed with the other visions that we have. So, just wanted to make that statement, lest it be unclear what I really think about the big picture from this discussion.
Well, we totally agree on that, and I think, the challenge that we have is, there's this philosophical question of whether this even makes sense, right? And I think we ought to have that conversation to decide whether or not it is appropriate for something so important as to decide what we build, where we build, how we address affordable housing, how we build the type of communities that we need, whether that should be dictated, whether we should be seeding a large proportion of that decision to the school system, which has different priorities and different focus than perhaps we have, and understandably they're worried about our most indispensable public resource, our public education system, making sure that our young people are being prepared for the future, not necessarily deciding what can be built and where it can be built. But it certainly does have an impact on the school system, because where we can build housing and how we can build the type of communities that we want have a direct impact on what type of public schools we have. The communities that we build have a direct relationship to that. I think that there's also these questions of how many years and what we do. I think the challenge we get is how we talk about it too. I mean, the idea that moratoriums, I think, are there for a reason, and it makes sense to a certain degree as a nuclear option, right? The idea is supposed to be that the threat of moratorium focuses resources in the places where they are most needed to address capacity to avoid major school overcrowding issues. The challenge that we get is when the nuclear option doesn't work and it blows up. And, frankly, that's where we're at. I mean, it's exploded, it's blown up, and that doesn't solve any problem. And I just, think it's important for us to all recognize that moratoriums don't build schools. This isn't a solution to any problem. It's supposed to be a threat.
Actually, they undermine our ability to build schools because we don't get the tax revenue.
Exactly. And so, I think sometimes when people talk about moratoriums, they talk about, shutting it down so we can address our school overcrowding issues. And I think you can make some argument maybe that it, could stop the bleeding, but even that doesn't work because it doesn't allow us to even keep up with the pipeline that we need to address the children that we have in our schools. It doesn't change the fact that our neighborhoods are turning over still at the same rates, which is where a large proportion of the school generation is coming from. And so, I look forward to this robust conversation. I share your frustration, particularly with Grosvenor, but more broadly than that as well. I mean, this is an obvious opportunity to redevelop an area that is in desperate need of redevelopment, where there's tremendous opportunity, access to trails and green space, and right on the metro. We have huge investment in Strathmore, which could be activated in a much more significant way. That we're missing out on all of this and we're pushing it off, and the timing is
Meanwhile,
real.
Whitman could take a few more students. Your alma mater is right next to Walter Johnson.
Gabe's alma mater. I'm a Churchill guy.
Oh, you're Churchill.
Churchill also could take a few more students. I will say that I shook 561 hands at graduations of the graduating class, but there is capacity at Churchill because it has dipped in recent years, and so there are lots of ways to solve these problems. We have to get really serious about them, but I think it starts with talking about the issues in the right way and addressing them in a serious way, and that is that a moratorium is supposed to be a threat. It's supposed to be the stick that forces the behavior that we want, which is public investment in resources in the areas that are in most need. Moratoriums are not a solution.
But the issue
They're
is
a threat to hopefully get a solution.
The threat is that the community is really unhappy when schools are overcrowded. That's the threat, and that's why we put hundreds of millions of dollars in the budget for school construction.
Can I weigh in on this a little bit, if you don't mind? Look, the school moratorium issue has largely been avoided in many cases because, first of all, the council's done several things. First of all, the whole idea of having the placeholder projects, the solution projects. Those are projects that keep areas out of moratorium. And the reason why they're done is because even though the money isn't in the CIP to build an addition, the school board knows there's a problem, they're working on a solution, and we are taking it on faith. They're going to recommend a project the following fiscal year, or maybe 2 years at the latest, which will fund that project, usually an elementary school addition or a new school. And as I remember answering this question 10 years ago when Mr. Elrich raised the question, well, how do you know the council is going to fund that? And I said, Mr. Elrich, as the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, the council always approves school capacity projects. So, and that ended that discussion. It was true. And in fact, all the solution projects we've done, with a couple of exceptions, have in fact turned out exactly the way we expected. And a couple of places where it didn't turn out is because the school board later decided, we don't need to have that addition or that new school. Secondly, this last CIP, there was also forecast that Quince Orchard and Rich Montgomery would go in a moratorium. But however, there's a Crown High School project, which you actually funded in the CIP last time and again this year, which shows that the last part of construction is in fiscal year 24, a small amount. It looks, smells, tastes like a project that will be open by September 2024, which would be countable. The school board did not want to put a date on the PDF, saying this school will open in September 2024. However, the council put in language saying that based on the board's recommended construction schedule, we anticipate that it will be open by then. And as a result of that, those two high schools will not go moratorium. So you've done a lot of things to keep areas out of moratorium. And finally, these moratoria that exist, I've been around a long time, they exist for 1 year, 2 years. I laugh because we used to have transportation moratoriums that lasted a decade, because you couldn't turn around quickly and build a school. So Farrell and White Oak was in moratorium for a decade. And you had other areas that were in moratorium for 4, 5, 6 years, because you couldn't turn around quickly.
We're getting smarter, but we're not quite there yet.
Well, we changed the transportation test so those kinds of moratoriums don't happen. What I'm saying is that the moratorium problem isn't nearly as great as it used to be for all sorts of reasons.
We used to be 0.6 students, now we're about 0.9.
That was about fourth period for me, once I had woken up a little bit.
All right.
And I just want to point out in the interest of our grammar lesson that the plural of moratorium is moratoria. Right. So I just want to make sure we're using the correct vernacular.
Okay.
Thanks for your leadership.
But we don't want plural. We don't want plural of moratoria, by the way. Thank you.
All right.